Okay, so what do you call yourself? Huh? ¿Cómo se llama?
Antonio Montana. And you? What you call yourself?
Where'd you learn to speak the English, Tony?
In a school. And my father, he was from the United States. Yeah, just like you know. He was a Yankee. He used to take me a lot to the movies, you know. I learned. I watched the guys like Humphrey Bogart, James Cagney. They teach me to talk. I like those guys. I always know one day I'm coming here, United States.
1980, Miami. They called it Little Havana, where the American dream had a price tag, and only one man in a million was hungry enough to pay.
In this country, you gotta make the money first. Then when you get the money, you get the power. Then when you get the power, then you get the woman.
Scarface. For one brief moment, the world was his.
A chick he's with. She like me.
You must be kidding.
What you talking about? That's a Cadillac.
How do you know?
The eyes, Chico. They never lie.
Man, that's the boss's lady, okay?
I am the boss.
That guy's soft.
I like you, Tony. There is no lying in you.
Here's to the land of opportunity.
We do business together a long time.
I know the street. And I'm making all the right connections.
Remember I told you when you started, the guys who last in this business are the guys who fly straight.
With the right woman, there's no stopping me. I could go right to the top.
The word on the street, Tony, is you're not a small-time punk anymore. Supreme Court says that your privacy can be invaded.
You sweep the house this month?
You're spending a lot of money on this counter surveillance.
We're doing 10 million, 15 million a month. Come on. Now, that's serious money, you know? Your bank boys gotta come down a bit.
Who else can you trust? That's why you pay us what you do. You trust us. You're in good hands with us.
Al Pacino is Scarface. He loved the American dream with a vengeance. Al Pacino, Scarface.
Hi, everybody, and welcome once again to GeekFest Rants. My name is Carlos Perron, and joining me here I have James. Say hi, James.
Hello, hello.
Well, today we are going to be kind of continuing with what I think was a pretty enjoyable episode we did a few weeks ago. I remember we were talking about some of the Crichton films, the Michael Crichton films, and we were able to talk about some of our favorite ones. You know, not just the big, gigantic, popular ones that most people are familiar with, but maybe a little obscure ones. We're going to kind of do that today with Brian De Palma.
Yeah, it was fun to do it, and I'm excited about this one, too.
Yeah, this is a director that maybe kids these days have no clue who he is, but in the mid to late 70s and I would say 80s and maybe in the early 90s, you know, he was kind of on a roll. He kind of developed a reputation when he was young because he was part of that whole, you know, new wave American independent, you know, post Easy Rider wave of directors that included some of our, you know, absolute favorites like, you know, Lucas, Spielberg, Coppola, Scorsese. He was kind of part of that group. They were like independent free thinkers type of directors, and they all kind of went in completely different directors. You also had Milius, you know, the guy who directed Conan. You know, they were children of the 60s, if you will. Very independent free thinkers, you know, anti-government type of guys who express themselves in different ways. You know, you have the super commercial successes like Spielberg and in a way Lucas, but then you have the guys who are, you know, went very serious like the Coppolas and the Scorseses. And De Palma kind of carved his own little space, if you will, because as far as I remember, even back from college, when we kind of would talk about him and I don't want to say study him, but look at his body of work, from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, he was kind of like the up-and-coming Hitchcock. He was like this pseudo-horror, weird director, almost like a Lynch type of guy who was creating these kind of scary, creepy movies that kind of resonate with us. Now, James, what do you remember as far as like the oldest thing you remember from him?
Well, I'd say probably when I was a kid, Carrie was a big deal. Now, did I know at the time who he was and as a director and how much of him is in that movie? Probably not, but I would say I knew that movie existed because John Travolta appeared in it, and I was a big John Travolta fan from Welcome Back, Kotter. And it would eventually play on TV, as got a little older in the late 70s or early 80s. And then they would obviously showcase, Carrie starring John Travolta and Sissy Spacek. You know what I mean? Because John Travolta was the biggest deal at the time. Sissy Spacek was coming on pretty strong, winning Oscars. And so then it's like, oh, that's real interesting. And then I would say the next one that I knew of was Dressed to Kill, because that was a big deal for me because I know Michael Caine, I know Angie Dickinson. Even though this is a 1980 movie, I'm still youngish, but these were big actors of the day. And Angie Dickinson being in it, and the subject matter and the stuff that goes on in the movie that we'll talk about eventually, it was a big deal in the press. So then it was like, oh, well, why would you do this role? And she was like, well, I'd like to do it because I want to work with, these people. And she would point out, Brian De Palma, and then he would have his 2 cents as the way the old press kits used to work. And so it was very, very, that was like the jumping off point. And then after that, some of his other stuff blew my mind, like some of the movies that are some of my favorites, that he's done.
Yeah, obviously, by the time he was making these films, we were way too young to, first of all, probably see them, in the theater. Yeah, this
was TV stuff that I saw because I didn't see.
And number two, realize the fact that he was an important filmmaker at the time. We were too young to even understand filmmaking, from that angle. It's later on in our lives, I'm sure, maybe around, when we became teenagers, high school, especially college, that you start to then study these people and notice these patterns or these styles that are either completely original or some people will call them an homage to previous directors of a previous era. But for me, Carrie was probably the first one that I saw, just like you, either on TV, most likely on video,
HBO or something,
a rental or something, or HBO, because the movie came out in '76. But let's just mention something. He made a whole bunch of films before that, not very popular films. I know that he did one in '73 called Sisters, which was kind of like the beginning of his horror suspense role of films that he made. But then he did something completely bizarre called Phantom of Paradise. Now tell us what that's about.
Well, Phantom of Paradise is one of those, it's kind of like the guilty pleasures like we were talking about.
Very guilty from what I understand.
Yeah, it's not as good as the ones we've discussed. But, it's got a cult following, and by cult, probably a bunch of nerds. But, we like some
rock
weird
opera.
Yeah, we like some weird stuff, so I don't take it away from anybody who's totally into it. What I like about it, I like Paul Williams. Paul Williams is Little Enos, and he's in the Muppet movie, and he's in, he was a big deal in the 70s, pardon the pun. And so the fact that he's in it and part of it makes me give it a second and third look. And what they were basically doing was, they call it musical horror online, but basically it was a takeoff of Phantom of the Opera.
Phantom of the Opera, yeah.
It like Sgt. Pepper, when we talked about it a couple months ago, they took some liberties with the story and brought it to at the modern of the 70s time, how a record producer is evil and the boss type of thing is evil, and how corporation, and this guy's going to get his revenge after a botched whatever. And, I don't really want to ruin it for anybody because I really think you've got to see this to believe it. This is one of those movies that you almost can't believe they put money into.
Wow.
I always bring it back to like Bugsy Malone. It was an all-kid cast of a gangster movie from the 40s. And this is basically a 70s. This is a movie of its time.
It took some time for it to become a cult type of movie, but unfortunately not my kind of cult movie.
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
Well, luckily this didn't sink his career. This was 1974.
Oh yeah,
By the time
now a movie like this comes out. I mean, this is like a Baz Luhrmann movie without it being good. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like very over the top is what I mean by that.
Yeah. So 2 years later, you mentioned Carrie. He does Carrie, which is probably one of the first, maybe even the first Stephen King adaptation. Stephen King, Carrie was his first huge hit, and they handed over to Brian De Palma, which, as far as I'm concerned, he did an excellent job. You mentioned earlier, John Travolta, William Katt.
Yeah, it scared me. This kind of stuff scares me. These horror. Big cast.
This is a girl who has telekinetic powers. Cece Spacek plays her, and she became super famous, around that time because of this role, which, again, not only is it horror, but it's controversial horror because it had to do with the girl, going through puberty and how certain things are kind of triggering her super, telekinetic powers and stuff like that. And it was kind of slightly taboo, the subject matter, you know what I mean? So it had like this weird thing about it. But one quick story about Carrie, which goes back to our number one obsession, that's Star Wars, is that while they were casting Carrie, Lucas was casting Star Wars, and they were trading. They were sharing the casting office. So as actors would come in to audition for Star Wars, they would then turn around and audition for Carrie and back and forth. So there are a whole bunch of videos on YouTube of Star Wars casting sessions, and you're going to notice a lot of actors audition for Star Wars for Han Solo, Leia, and Luke that ended up being in Carrie.
Yep.
Like William Katt and, a whole bunch of these guys.
He was trying out for Luke.
Yeah, but, he got one role. He didn't get the other one, so I guess...
I'm pretty sure Nancy Allen was trying to be Princess Leia. I think I recall seeing that. And yeah, it shows how this period of time was very incestuous in a good way. That these guys...
They were all collaborating with each other, sharing resources, that kind of thing.
They were collaborators, not competitors. And I think
it was back to that independent filmmaker type of thing where these guys, everything gets done with, rubber bands and
we're
chewing
all
gum.
cool. We can help each other. I want you to be good. Your movie will be better.
Because it was that post-hippie era where, they're all helping each other out. Now, after Carrie, he did a movie called The Fury, which I actually saw on cable a couple times. And it's unusual because it's got Kirk Douglas, but it's also about somebody with telekinetic powers, which is kind of weird. Like, why would he do Carrie, which was a huge hit, and then follow it up with a movie that he could be accused of just kind of copying his same theme? And it gets even weirder than that because you think about it, The Fury could also be considered a little bit of a Firestarter, another Stephen King book that comes later. So it's kind of weird how these are kind of juxtapositioned, these films.
And talking about street cred, this movie had a lot. I mean, the cast, John Williams' music, it's just really... It's just really well done for the type. You would think this movie could be crap, and it's not. It's still
okay.
something that
I'm telling you, Netflix, cable, you can catch it. It's out there. It's a cool little horror suspense story. It's not bad. Now, you mentioned Dress to Kill. Now, Dress to Kill, it's 1980, and he continues with this controversial theme of there's a murderer and a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist is treating these different people, and Angie Dickinson is somewhat of the lead, and she's also a policewoman. That's how I remember Angie Dickinson from.
Angie Dickinson was huge. She was like an unofficial member of like the Rat Pack. She'd be like mixed up with those guys, or she'd be hanging out with Bob Hope going to Vietnam. Angie Dickinson was a very, very big deal and beautiful. And when this movie came out, again, I'm probably exaggerating a little bit how much I know, but she really was such a big deal that when this came out, this made, and it was very, very taboo in what was going on. There was like this rape scene or whatever, which,
the fact that she's in a nude scene and she was an older woman. Now, I don't remember if they use a body double or not, but it was kind of like, ooh, wait a minute. She's supposed to be Hollywood royalty. What is she doing, in a nude scene type of deal?
And that was something because, when you tell a teenager that, there's this, it's very sexual and this and that and everything, it's like, I want to see it even more now. So I probably didn't see it for like 2 years. I think around 1982 was when all these movies caught up to me that I actually got to see them.
Well, I imagine it would probably HBO or something.
Well, exactly. That's when we got HBO. Knowing a movie is one thing. Seeing a movie like this was same thing. Like Heavy Metal movie and a number of other movies that we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
My father was pretty loose with letting me see things, and we saw things that most kids wouldn't see in the theater. But, this was not one of them. This was not something they were... But, yeah, I want to just mention, also Michael Caine being in it. Michael Caine...
He's a big deal, too.
He's huge. I mean, Michael Caine is so he's so underrated, he's overrated, or something like that. But, around this time, he was taking some chances. And he's in a lot of movies, and people know him now as, Alfred, and, he's an older gentleman and everything like that. But he did The Island, he did The Hand, he did this movie. These are some creepy subject matters to get mixed up in that could have got him, not drummed out of Hollywood or anything, but
But the spoiler of this film, the twist, and we're dealing with spoilers here when we talk about movies, is the fact that, and you said he takes risks. He ends up being the killer who's a cross-dresser.
So that's what I'm saying.
So it was oh my God, it's Michael Caine. He's, Mr. Wonderful.
So, and then after this, and then after these movies, he had a string of all these fantastic, Woody Allen-style movies.
Right, he did all the Woody Allen stuff.
Blame It on Rio, which is one of my favorite movies ever, which makes me love him even more. And so for him to do this stuff, it's just... He's got some, all the things he's been into. That's another show altogether. We have to do a Michael Caine movie.
Yeah.
And
well, let me mention something more about Dress to Kill. The way I discovered Dress to Kill, and again, a lot of my childhood goes back to HBO.
Well,
my source of unusual stuff. During the early 80s, HBO was playing a documentary, I don't know if you remember, called Terror in the Isles.
Yeah, sure.
It was hosted by...
And it scared the hell out of me.
Donald Pleasence. And it was basically a compilation of horror film, shocking scenes. And that's kind of how I made my list of, I got to see this. I got to see that. I saw a clip of Alien for the first time. I saw a clip of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Night of the Living Dead. And this was one of the movies they kind of talked about. So that's kind of how I started to kind of compiling these lists of films I have to find. Again, back during the early cable / VHS days.
And it's funny you mentioned Night of the Living Dead and me talking about the things my father would take me to go see. I actually saw that in a drive-in, and I guess a combination of being scared and eating too much popcorn made me vomit all over his relatively new car. So that's my little tidbit about the... I think that's why I skip horror movies a lot. I
don't have still recovering from it.
I don't have good experiences around them.
Well, Dress to Kill, the following year, was followed by Blowout, which is a John Travolta film, which I'm sure, again, a lot of people are not probably aware of it. Now, you said this is a remake, more or less, of another film.
It's not a remake. Here's the deal.
An homage?
This was, again, a big deal. John Travolta's in it. So, again, he's really huge now at this point. So getting him in it, he's done Saturday Night Fever. He's done Grease. He's done...
Right.
Was Urban Cowboy around this era and stuff like that?
Probably, yeah. Probably around that time.
So here's the deal with that. I did not see this in its entirety for whatever reason. I guess it just didn't strike me at the time of something I had to see. And again,
this is a
HBO.
really good film.
Yeah, that's the trouble. I'm disappointed in myself that I didn't put more attention to it. But I love Blow Up. Now, Blow Up is a Michelangelo Antonioni film from the 60s that is really fantastic about a photographer who basically goes through life through view of his camera, and he witnesses a murder and so on and so forth. Well, the premise of this movie, rather than visual, is sound. And John Travolta is a sound effects guy. And he's recording some stuff, and he winds up picking up plans or something of an assassination, which was,
a politician gets murdered or something.
Yeah, and it was very timely because we're not that far. It's almost 20 years, but it's not that far. Everybody who's around knows the Kennedy assassination. Presidents are attempted to be shot. Dr. King, John Lennon is, killed around this era, and it's just the Pope gets shot. So that's a big deal. And hearing this, and it's around, Reagan, in fact, was shot in 81. So it's very timely. And for his style, the De Palma style in this movie makes it, a way better movie than you would think it would be.
But this is also a style he's kind of developed and crafted, and he kind of continues with it because they're kind of like these dark, bleakish kind of endings, which I guess you could say they're very European, very French. they're not very happy endings in these films. Not all the good guys win at the end, which is part of that whole European film movement of, Italian and French and stuff like that, where it's like you don't get the traditional American happy ending.
That's right. And so I would say this is like his golden era. This is the era that one right after the other we're pretty impressed with. And
right.
you know what comes next.
He's still independent at this point, I would say. He's about to cross over into mainstream big Hollywood films next with another movie that I remember was part of that Terror in the Aisles scene. They were showing the chainsaw scene. We're talking about Scarface here now,
and it's one of our favorite. Both you and I are.
But let's
so
first
fond
of all
this.
talk about how it fits into it, and we both kind of feel the same way, even though we approach it from different angles. But to me, this is almost an unofficial prequel to the whole Miami Vice series.
That's right. An accidental prequel. And I think
exactly
this movie is a response to the Cuban immigration and the refugee situation from the early 80s.
From the 80s, right.
Miami is basically transformed from an old people's vacation or retirement place to the pinnacle of drug transportation and dealing and all that comes with that. And it basically...
But again, remember, it's Scarface, so they're using an old story, which has nothing to do with Miami, and it has nothing to do with Cuba or Cubans or anything. They're just kind of reimagining it with a modern
They came at
setting.
it from like an Al Capone, gangster type thing to modernize it in our era. And this is so Al Capone is about booze and all that kind of stuff. Well, what's the modern version of that? And it's this, the cocaine.
It was coke. It was the whole cocaine craze of the 80s. Now, this is obviously the famous Al Pacino film, and anybody who sees the movie will understand off the bat, Al Pacino does not look, he doesn't sound, and he doesn't act like anything you would imagine a Cuban drug dealer would. But because he's such an amazing actor, you kind of overlook all that because he's so entertaining, and this whole setting, the whole mood, the music, you're talking about Giorgio Moroder, which we talked about him before, having to do with his collaborations that he's done with Daft Punk and stuff like that, all his 70s and 80s stuff. Perfect. The feel of the movie, the co-stars. You have a lot of up-and-comings. Michelle Pfeiffer, Elizabeth Mastrantonio.
Elizabeth Mastrantonio, yeah.
Yeah. You have his friend, Stephen Bauer.
Stephen Bauer, again, he's up and coming. Robert Loggia is in it. F.
Murray Abraham.
F. Murray. That's
Murray,
a Howard Stern
exactly.
joke. F. Murray, F. Jackie.
You got these great actors, but obviously Pacino just steals the movie. Every line he says he just chews the screen.
It's written by Oliver Stone. It's written, and who himself has had some success in is just about to hit his stride.
He's still a writer at that point, and he hasn't been that successful directing, so he's kind of trying to break in.
Yeah, but this is like 9 months or so, maybe give or take 9 months before Miami Vice is even anybody knows it exists. And so to me and you, and for you, I guess, like you said, you come at it from a slightly different angle. But for me now, when I watch it, I'm like, this is what's causing what Sonny and Rico and that world have to deal with.
Right, it becomes it becomes the accidental backstory to that whole show that we like,
and that's pretty great. It's just great how it can tie in accidentally like that. Sometimes it works.
Now, the big controversy on this film not only was the unbelievable drug use that it's nonstop from top to bottom, but there was the famous controversial chainsaw scene where Tony and his friend are tied up, and they're trying to torture them, and they take a chainsaw to his friend, even though you barely see anything in the film because he cut around it. You don't see anything, more or less, but it is such a shocking scene that it's almost like the Psycho scene. You don't see the knife go in, but you just feel the whole thing. And same thing in this movie, how now critically, this movie, from what I understand, it wasn't very well received.
No, people were very disappointed. It's like, what's going on here? Why would this, and I remember it coming out and a big deal being advertised, because this is now 83. This is late 83. So in our world, Return of the Jedi has come now and has been the biggest movie of the year.
Right. E.T. the year before,
Yeah. And I recall during the screenings of Return of the Jedi that I saw ridiculous amounts of time, and then also like Octopussy and a couple other big movies came out in '83 that we're all fond of. So you would see these trailers, and I remember seeing the trailer of this and being the original teaser trailer, or whatever it was they would call it. It was very intense. You know what I mean? It was very serious. Yeah. And when I say scary, I don't mean scary in a horror way, but scary. It's like. Oh my God! And I remember hearing a radio ad for it and talking about the deep voice and this is blah 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 and then this is the same time where like the King of Comedy. I remember seeing the King of Comedy trailer and stuff.
It was a dark movie.
Yeah, movies are changing.
It's a slight change of tone for his type of movie. He's going from the horror, suspense, shocker to the crime drama shocker. Yeah. So there's a slight change there, taking place.
And then it's like, and by scary, again, I'll come back to that word, that it's like, whoa, this is what the world is like. I am a teenager, and I kind of know stuff. I mean, I don't really know the drug culture that. I probably know more of, entertainment and stuff, but I really didn't get into I wasn't in the drug world with people, talking about that kind of stuff. It wasn't like my thing or my family's thing, but you start to think, oh my God, is this what's going on out there? And then you start to hear people like, oh, he's recovering. He's got like, this is when it comes, like, nobody wants to talk about, like, yeah, he's got a problem.
And forget the fact that this movie generated 1 million quotes. All of them Pacino quotes.
Is like the biggest.
It's chock full of quotes.
This has turned into the biggest movie now for hip hop artists.
Comedians and person who do Pacino impersonators. They got to have their Scarface quotes all over the place for that. Now, let's jump into his next film because I know it's one of your guilty pleasures, I guess. Body Double.
Yeah, to me, this is why I want to do this show, and everything else is just working to get to this. And Body Double.
So he's approaching a different subject matter. He's still sticking with the suspense,
it's still a
murder mystery.
Yeah,
but now he's kind of turning it into a very different theme.
I would say definitely this movie. I stumbled upon it accidentally late at night on HBO.
That's me too. HBO, yeah.
And you and I know we've had debates about this one because of the act. Craig Wassen's involved. Melanie Griffin, which is Mrs. Don Johnson at one point.
Yeah. And no clue who she was at the point at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel I know who she was as an actress because her being a famous person's daughter was a big deal. But when we watch this movie, you start to say, okay, well, that's weird. And it's another one of those movies that have like really fantastic music like Looker did without the guy's name is Pino Donaggio, which I still don't even know if he's ever done anything else.
That sounds like some kind of wine you have.
Yeah, and this music was so great that listening to it, you just wanted to watch it over again. And then all of a sudden in the middle of it, what's Frankie Goes to Hollywood doing
it's perfect for this film. Come on, the subject matter is pornography for crying out loud.
That's just like I said, that's just the thing that it just kicks into that. And it's like, wow, I can't believe these guys are in it. But the one thing you and I had, again, it kind of ties it back into Miami Vice. Who are the actors? What guy is what? And Guy Boyd.
Guy Boyd, that name is that's gonna be written on your grave, I think. Boyd.
So Guy Boyd played Hackman, but I think you and I had a debate one time because we mistook him, or I did. You were like, no, this is who he is, and I'm thinking. So I was doing you saying Hackman, who Hackman was, and stuff like that. So Guy Boyd, and I wound up screwing it up with Paul Guilfoyle, who's an actor who was also in Miami Vice eventually, but he was better known, I think, to you and I as being in Wise Guy, and that's one of our favorite shows. So That's where this little aside came from, and it turned out you were right and I was wrong, and I don't admit that very often.
Well, this one is, I would imagine, the biggest in terms of Hitchcock tribute films. This is kind of like a little bit of Rear Window because he witnesses something watching, being a voyeur, watching through a window, and also Vertigo about, that it's so obvious that he's kind of paying homage to Hitchcock. The one thing I want to mention also is the main actor, Craig Wasson, who is not a very popular actor these days, but he kind of looks like Bill Maher. Every time I think of him, it's like, it's the Bill Maher looking guy.
And people do screw up. Yeah, his career, he had potential, but it didn't really take off the way most people.
Yeah.
He's been in some things that we all know, but it just didn't get huge. He's also now, he's been doing, like it says, I've been reading his IMDb, and it's like he's narrating the Stephen King 11/22/63 for the audiobook. So, He's still out there if you like him. But the funny thing is, like Dennis Franz is in this movie, who winds up playing Sipowicz. He's somebody who's worked with De Palma a bit. And so it has a pretty cool cast. It has a nice look. It's got a great feel while you're watching it. It shows California in the way, like Beverly Hills and, the struggling actor and all this, that, and the other thing.
But like we mentioned earlier, by this time he's no longer an independent kind of director. He's now in the Hollywood stuff machine.
Now.
And the type of stuff he's getting is very Hollywoodish. Now,
like Body Double didn't make a ton of money. I think it did okay. It did okay.
It wasn't a hit. Like I wouldn't even say as big of a hit of even Scarface.
And I'm reading online right now that both Scarface and Body Double, he was nominated for Golden Raspberry as the worst director, which is that's not the first time. Dressed to Kill. I mean, so for a guy who we've grown up basically respecting his style and the movies and loving them, man, to have a couple Golden Raspberries is worth.
The critics are pretty harsh on some of his most memorable films.
It's just weird. We're talking about him like Academy Award winner. He should be.
Well,
and in reality,
we're getting there. We're slowly getting to the Academy Award related stuff. But before you hit Academy Awards, you got to hit a low point with Wise Guys, which is a horrible comedy with Joe Piscopo and Danny DeVito, I believe.
And Ray Sharkey's in it, and Captain Lou, and
but it's like what
and
the
Nick
hell
Tortelli's
was he
in
thinking?
It.
He doesn't have a big history of comedies, but this is like, it's kind of like, let's just skip and move on to the next thing, because the next thing is where the Academy Awards start. He did the Untouchables.
I just want to mention, there's a guy in it. He used to be. I knew the man. This is. I have a feeling he did this movie because he grew up in Newark, New Jersey. Okay, and these are people that he probably said, like you come across these guys, gangsters, wannabe gangsters, people who think they're connected. They know people. They know they can help you out. They can fix something for you. So I have a feeling he did this for the fun of his growing up and who was involved. But
maybe he wanted to do something like Get Shorty.
This was a who's who of Italian guys who eventually don't get seen again until The Sopranos comes out. But there's one guy in it named Tony Monifo, and I know him originally. I knew his daughter, and Tony Monifo was a Stallone bodyguard back in the Rocky days, even the earlier days. And he lived in my town. I went to his house. Like I said, I knew his daughter. There was a party. Not that we were best friends or anything, but I could talk to this guy. And as I was getting older and getting into the business and stuff, he would give me advice and tell me some things and people he knew, which just gave me a little bit of, confidence that, I'm talking to, I know the guy, and again, it didn't change my life. He didn't get me any work or something, but somebody I could just go and say, hey, this is what I'm doing, this is where I'm going, this is where I'm coming from. And he's since died, but it's just cool that he would get these other side roles as because people knew him from the Stallone days and, the bodyguard days. And he was he's a good guy, he's a good fella, that he was legitimately one of those kind of guys.
Well, as I said before, this kind of led to the beginning of his more respected period, I guess, more commercial period, where actual Academy Awards were thrown around. And I'm talking about the Untouchables. This was the classic modern Untouchables. De Niro playing Al Capone, Sean Connery, Kevin Costner with one of his biggest hits. And I think Connery's the one who got the Academy Award, right?
Yeah, for Best Supporting Actor, exactly. And he's quoted every day. The President Obama's quoted him. Everybody
right.
is.
And it's a perfect crime epic type of film. It's got the traditional De Palma type of settings and shots and slow-mos and beats, but it is so well in terms of it being a period piece. It fits perfectly, in probably, I would say, the top 10, period piece crime dramas. Like any good Scorsese or Coppola film, the Untouchables probably fits in there.
Now, the funny thing is, though, I just want to mention, and because I've met him, David Mamet writes this, okay? And the writing is spectacular. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the writing, the way it's shot. Everything was on, perfect cylinders. But the thing is, it's not really accurate time-wise, and the characters, they didn't really all interact in the same manner, and and all that kind of stuff. Based on they're based on the characters. And my coworker, we've met David Mamet. He came onto our show, and my coworker said, "Hey, blah blah blah. What about this? Did it? What made you do that?" And he's like, it's like maybe George Washington didn't knock down the cherry tree, but he could have. And what if, so they took some liberties, and he admits that he did, but there's nothing wrong with the movie. This is a movie that really, there's people paying homages to it in movies that come, gangster style movies that come out now. And you watch some of the new stuff like they recently did. I don't know if it was Dillinger or whoever it was, but Johnny Depp played the character. Do you remember that movie?
Yep.
You want it to be this, and you've got some real heavy hitters, and it just didn't. It doesn't come to this. It doesn't. You don't get it. So
this definitely brought him made him an A-lister in Hollywood. Now he hit a peak that now he has to try to somehow maintain. And what follows up this film is Casualties of War, which is some people could kind of say is like, well, it was in the mid 80s. It's 1989. A few years earlier, Oliver Stone had put out Platoon, so there was a wave of Vietnam films.
Let's say
86, 87.
I would say 85-ish, the movie started coming out, and some paying tribute to the Vietnam vets, some being a little more critical of the war and giving it more of an FU. It depends. Like, I think, obviously, Oliver Stone's Platoon was one of the best. I think
that was the standard.
Full Metal Jacket was probably one of the best, even though it's not as serious. Yeah, it's exactly. But I would say this one tries to get a little bit heavy. It's like it tippy-toes into, the war was the people were corrupt and this, and I'm
right.
Not
There's a little bit of the My Lai massacre theme.
Michael J. Fox might have been. He might have been miscast. Exactly.
Yes,
I think this would have been a better movie, because Sean Penn does a nice job, and a lot of the other guys, a lot of the other guys in it are serious. They're good at what they do, and they're serious. I don't like it because they were selling, Michael J. Fox, which is now a couple of years after his Marty McFly movies.
Oh yeah,
and
he's trying to do the serious thing,
Yeah, and I didn't buy it, and I didn't like it, and so I'm sorry. It's not something I'd probably ever watch again. And
it's not a feel-good movie, that's for sure. It's got a trial in it, and there's a lot of court-related, testimony and saying what you witnessed and what happened, and that kind of feel to it. But that's one of the things I remember the most is that Michael J. Fox just stuck out like a sore thumb in that movie. Again, he's still kind of riding on the coattails of the Untouchables, but up next he's got Bonfire of the Vanities, which was a huge bomb and a very anticipated film. This was supposed to be huge.
Yeah, this movie was supposed to be huge. It had
Bruce Willis, Melanie Griffith,
unbelievable
everybody.
cast. Yeah, unbelievable cast. Based on a book, very timely in a lot of ways, and very trendy, and very the piece de resistance of liberal thinking of the day, and and it came like a bomb hit, and everybody who was associated with it kind of like wanted to run the other way after.
He took a big black eye out of that movie, which then he followed up with another, trying to kind of go back to his roots, I guess, a movie called Raising Cain with John Lithgow, kind of like another one of these horror murder mystery type of things, which kind of bombed also.
Stephen Bauer's in it. He went that by now then. A lot of, like we've talked about, he's still got, some serious respect, but sometimes once you hit a movie like that, it's like Michael Cimino. He's very artistic and very talented, and then you have a Heaven's Gate, and it's very tough. It's very tough to have that big in this industry to, unfortunately, to recover very quickly from something like that. Very few people can do that.
Well, luckily, he still has a couple left in him as far as I'm concerned. The next one up is Carlito's Way, which I remember at the time, including myself, a lot of people thought of it as not a sequel to Scarface, but I don't know what you want to call it, because it's again about a drug dealer who is kind of trying to get out of the business in a way. So it kind of calls back to the whole thing having to do with Scarface, but this is takes place in the 70s. It's a darker film. Pacino is doing a different kind of feel.
Now, Pacino's had his resurgence. This is early 90s, but he's had a resurgence
this is Sea of
some
Love,
big movies.
After Sea of Love and some of his comeback films. And this
it's produced by his agent, or basically Martin Bregman was
John
Pacino's
Leguizamo
guy.
is in it. He's pretty good in it, but this is definitely a movie that if you like Scarface, you have to watch this film because it's almost like having a musical artist cover a song. This is kind of like covering Scarface in a strange way, even though it's not exactly like Scarface, but the theme kind of mirrors it a little bit. it was, again, not super successful, but I think you need to watch it. People need to see this film because it's above average as far as the De Palma films. Now, what comes next, I think, is probably, as far as I'm concerned, his last big hit. And that's Mission Impossible. What can you tell us about that, James?
Well, I can tell you that that's the movie that got me to try the internet, because I would say you and I both are we're pretty hip to new things and, getting in on technology and things, knowing what's coming and when it's coming.
And it's so dated. That movie is so dated when you watch it today. It's 1996.
It's dated for a lot of reasons, but I was avoiding the internet, and I can't really explain why, because I was basically on the internet before it was the internet, and it used to be called, back in the early 80s, it was like a Usenet type thing, and you would type in
chat groups and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I didn't get into that kind of stuff, but I did find like a ton of Star Wars toy-related stuff, and I guess they were called
Usenet or something like that.
Yeah, that's like I said, and it's basically you would go on and there'd be like you type in Star Wars, it's like the internet kind of, but you type in Star Wars figures or something like that, and other people who are dealing or talking or bringing you information or saying, hey, did you know that there's figures in Brazil that weren't released in America? And you'd be like, oh, okay, and somebody has them. Now it's basically the internet or eBay or something. So this movie has a big deal about the internet and the biblical reference of Job and how it ties into the code and everything like that. But this was a movie that didn't need to be made, but the fact that it was made, and now there's 5 movies in the series,
right,
that some of them have gotten, some of them are
but
really good.
But you got to remember, you're dealing with a property that already exists, that used to be very popular, and nobody at the time had tried to mess with it too much. There was a TV show I remember they tried making.
Yeah, and the James Bond movies were waning. And
so this was an alternate. This is an alternative to that kind of thing. Exactly.
So other people are saying, "Hey, let me see." And Tom Cruise was like, "Hey, I'm big.
Well,
I think this is
Tom
good."
Cruise. I mean, come on, that's a freaking huge name to throw at this movie, and Emilio Estevez and was it Ving Rhames?
Jean Reno is in this, and we love him from The Professional, which had
John
come out
Voight plays Mr. Phelps.
But here's a funny thing.
Super action stunts, the works. It's a perfect Hollywood film.
It succeeded and made a lot of money and propelled everybody forward with the property, but they kind of failed because it turns out everybody who loved the Jim Phelps from the TV show felt burned. They felt burned because it's like he winds up being one of the villains in a way.
Right. Well, that's the twist.
It's like an FU to the FU to the TV series with Peter Graves. And I'm wondering, even now when I think about it, I avoid the movie because it's kind of like I love the way it looks. I love that they shot in Prague. I love
a lot of
the internet stuff. It's been, I'm not going to say mocked, but mimicked because of the whole getting into the room that you can't touch anything via cables and stuff.
And the masks, they do all the tricks from the show, the different masks they wear to pretend. And it has his look. That's the main thing about the film, is that it looks like a De Palma film. It has the weird crooked angles, all that strange stuff that he likes to mess with. It's all in there. It's all there for you.
And it winds up, like I said, propelling. I think basically he stepped away. He didn't want to do any more of these for whatever reason. I don't know. Maybe it just was too much out of his style.
But that was it. As far as I'm concerned, that's his last hit.
I give him one more. And I don't know. He had a couple
is it What Comes Next? Is it Snake Eyes?
I don't know Snake Eyes, so I guess it's not Snake Eyes.
I think that was with Nick Cage. I think
that's a Nick Cage. Gary Sinise is in it, but I think Gary Sinise is a great human being, and he's a great actor, and we like him a lot as for his philanthropy. But I like Mission to Mars, and not just because it's a cool Disney ride.
You like it because it got another Raspberry nomination for Worst Director.
Well, but there's a point. I like astronauts. They treated this, it was in the future. Now it's not that so much of the future, but at the time it was 2000, so it was 20 years in the future, which is 2020, which is right around the corner for us now. Yeah, but it's treated like these guys were astronauts and how they would interact and how the space program would work and them going into space for this mission to Mars, so on and so forth. But it had a legitimate feel, and it made me have a feel a little bit of a more modern Of the Right Stuff, how the guys interacted, and some of the other legitimate space movies, space flight. And Tim Robbins was probably still at his peak. Don Cheadle hadn't been as huge as he is now, which I like him a lot, so he's great in it. And you got just a few other. Kim Delaney is in it, and Jerry O'Connell. They don't make or break the movie, but you know them when you see them, and you're like, I like this. I like this vibe. And it just kind of fell flat because then by the end, it gets a little. I think it gets a little esoteric in the sense like everybody's Mars and what do they find there, and they wind up,
Yeah, they go a little over the top, and I think around that time there might have been one or two other Mars-related films.
And there was a Val at the same year or within.
So you start to get them all confused.
The Val Kilmer one comes out, and I met Val Kilmer during his promotion of it, and I love Val Kilmer. I love him as Jim Morrison. I love him in like just almost everything he's in. I get a kick out of, and I told him, I said, maybe I don't know if he was promoting that or something else, but I told him it's like I actually liked the movie, and he was appreciative because so many people were down on it, which has nothing to do with what we're talking about here. But it's just like these Mars movies, they tended to get a stink on them for some reason because people, I guess, were expecting something different, and I can understand it.
These days.
I can understand it, but kind of fell flat. And other than the Disney ride, nobody would ever remember this movie, unfortunately.
Well, unfortunately, his next couple of movies are kind of in that vein. You have Femme Fatale. I couldn't even tell you what that's about. I've never seen it.
Black Dahlia.
Black Dahlia. That's the murder, the famous 1950s murder.
It's based off of the James Elroy novel, and I know I've met James Ellroy. He wrote L.A. Confidential. He was really very talented writer. He's since passed, but it was a good cast. Scarlett Johansson, Josh Hartnett, Hilary Swank, Aaron Eckhart. these people are people we like in all their other movies. It's just it came and went.
But you can kind of tell that he's definitely trying to kind of go back to the well.
Yeah,
he's trying to go back to his roots.
Thriller,
his mystery thriller murder.
It's almost like
thing,
the Black Dahlia. Even though it's based on what it is based on, it has a modern, I'm not going to say modern, but like a newer version of Body Double. You know what I'm saying?
Well, that and Dress to Kill and Body Double. Yeah.
So basically, that's 10 years ago from now. And then the next thing he had was Redacted.
Again, he follows by Redacted, which is another one of these war type of films. Again, not a lot of traction on it. I don't think it really got him much. And then there's another one called Passion, which again, no clue what this thing is about.
Yeah,
it's
I didn't know it came out. It was 4 years ago. I didn't know it came out. It's called an erotic thriller. When Rachel McAdams is hot, Naomi Rapace,
really?
She was in that Alien. That what do they call that? Not Alien, but
Prometheus.
Yeah. So it's like, but basically, it looks like it could be an erotic thriller because these are two sexy ladies. But I didn't know it existed, and I don't even know if I'm interested at this point.
It sounds like it's like straight to video or something as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I understand he's come and gone maybe. The man's 75. Maybe he's not as on everybody's, the front burner, unfortunately. Maybe he's done everything he wants to do, and who knows if he's going to surprise us with something.
Well, the point is that he's got enough on his resume for any film fan, any genre film fan. If you're into the thrillers and the mysteries and the horror, that kind of thing, even crime dramas, there's a lot of good stuff in there that he's contributed to that is excellent. Unfortunately, you also have, the other 50% of his career that, you might not be too crazy about, but you can explore it. I want to see, after going through some of these lists, I want to go see some of these other films to see if there's any, nuggets, in the rough.
and I want to rewatch some of them that maybe at the time, now that I
have to watch Carlito's Way. You have to.
Yeah, well, that one you're definitely, because I don't feel like I've seen it. I don't know if I imagined it. I don't know. So I'm gonna check that out. And I guess this is our way of getting our audience, you guys, to check out. It's like, check this stuff out. You know the name. Maybe Untouchables and one or two other movies. But he's got quite a library. Yeah,
for our younger listeners, filmmaking did not start with Michael Bay. There are directors before Michael Bay.
We will do a Michael Bay show sometime because he's got some winners. He's got some winners.
I can contribute maybe 3 Michael Bay films. That's it. But anyway, I want to thank James for joining me as usual for these little quirky biographies almost of some of our favorite directors. And you guys for listening, and we will hopefully see you here soon at GeekFest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
Watch Body Double. Bye-bye.
He thought he was watching her, but she was watching him. He thought he was trespassing, but he was invited. He knew he had gone too far. He couldn't stop. He saw exactly what she wanted him to see. Brian De Palma, the modern master of suspense, invites you to witness a seduction, a mystery, a murder, body double. You can't believe everything you see.
Oh, is all you do is read comic books?
My God, this is a bunch of nerds theorizing about fiction material.
What?
Stop.